Good afternoon. Good afternoon, LinkedIn Live. How you doing? I feel like I should say good morning as well, because if you're joining us from Eastern time in the US, it will be morning for you. Good morning, Jen. How are you doing?
I'm great, Cheryl. How are you doing?
I am good. And how early is it for you right now?
It's about 20 after 8, early in the
Okay.
day for most, but not in
Yeah.
my family. So we're
Yeah.
all up for a while
Yeah.
now.
So if you're joining us in the US, you're probably just starting your day. Here in the UK, it's just almost 1:30, and we are live. We're live actually. I forgot to say, Jim. Actually, we're live not only on LinkedIn, we're also live on YouTube today. So
Excellent.
yeah, so you're the first of my LinkedIn Live guests who I'm kind of trying out the YouTube thing with as well. I'm just hoping that the technology doesn't baffle me. But welcome, Jen from WorkRamp. Jen is or was formerly one of the ERG leaders, in fact, a founder of one of the ERGs. So thank you for coming along. Jen, just tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you do, and a little bit about WorkRamp.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been in the learning space for nearly 20 years now. My recent birthday has confirmed that that's accurate math somehow. And that's how I found my way to WorkRamp. WorkRamp is an online learning platform. And
Mhm.
what I do with the company is I work with our clients, with my team, and we actually build their content, help create their training programs. And
Great.
it's a really incredibly powerful tool for
Yeah.
anything that's going to be remote learning. It's actually what pulled me into there from running my own consulting business. So, yeah, it's been a
Fantastic.
great, unexpected journey.
Great. And it sounds like a great fit, because yeah, learning and speaking and bringing people along and sort of looking out for people is obviously in your DNA, which is probably why you ended up, so heavily involved in the staff networks, right?
That is definitely what I've been told. Yes, I definitely gravitate towards anything that's people leadership or empowering others. We're not going to psychologically unpack that now, but yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
fascinating. It's fascinating. And also, and maybe we'll get into the psychology of staff networks and what you get in terms of the dynamic of staff networks and stuff. So for those of you that don't know, ERG stands for Employee Resource Group, and it is a term that in the UK is starting to become a little bit more popular, but it's fair to say that ERGs, and they're sometimes now called BRGs, that's like the latest incarnation, have been going for a long time in the US, and are really popular. I think I read somewhere that it's something like, nearly 90% of, certainly of larger organizations, tend to have employee resource groups. So Jen, tell us a little bit about the staff networks that you've been involved in, and also ones that you've led as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I had never been part of an ERG prior to being at WorkRamp. I worked for a
Okay.
company that was a little bit smaller, at least in our local staff.
Mm,
And frankly, moving into the tech space, you tend to be with younger people, people who are more open to and really pushing for things like that
yeah,
psychological safety and
yeah,
belonging in the workplace, which is also one of the things that drew me to WorkRamp. The first one that I experienced, I was actually part of. Two of them kind of started around the same time. One
mm,
of them we call WOW, which stands for Women of Work Ramp.
yeah,
And the other one is an LGBTQ space,
mhm.
which we coined LGBT cuties. So we just call it the cuties for short.
I love that. And I mean, I do love the names, just the
I do too.
names that people come up with for their staff network. So wow is cool. Yeah. So if your organization starts with a W, women
Mhm.
of something, you can then have,
Whatever. Yeah.
but then the cuties, the LGBT cuties. I mean, how cute is that, right?
Yeah, we joked in the beginning. We're like, how many people do you think are going to wonder what the IES stands for when we're just making it a fun, punny name?
They're going to assume it's some new abbreviation or
Yes,
something.
exactly. No one has asked, and I think we've made it clear that it was just a fun name, but
Cool.
curious in the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah. That's amazing. And then that probably then leads us on to the ERG that you actually then started. So you founded one of the ERGs. So tell us about what led you to doing that, because, and we've probably got people watching this either live or in the replay that are maybe pondering, maybe they're in the UK and their organization hasn't got an ERG, and they're thinking, I feel as though there are one or two of us that maybe need a little bit of support. So what was it that, got you thinking about starting the next ERG?
Well, I've always been drawn to just finding groups that are like-minded or share an identity,
Mm,
and it just makes such a difference in your ability to be authentic, to discover sides of yourself that you never knew, or to be
mm,
validated in experiences that maybe you thought were individual, but you find has more of that community feel.
yeah,
I've always been, a girl's girl, so to speak, that I've always been drawn to groups of women who are looking to empower each other and support each other through our own unique paths.
yeah,
And then as a person who came out much later in life, I was 30 when I finally owned and publicly shared my identity.
yeah,
So I didn't really have an in group, so to speak, in the
yeah,
LGBTQ community. And I
right,
didn't realize how much I was missing that until I
yeah,
joined our ERG. And that simple
mm,
piece that connects us just brought such an increased level of that belonging, right? Which is one of the purposes of having an
yeah,
ERG
yeah,
that, again, I didn't even notice was missing. Like, I have an
yeah,
incredible network of close friends and people that we all support each other. So I
yeah,
didn't recognize the gap there. And then seeing that impact, things
mm,
like mental health have always been exceptionally important to me
yeah,
for a number of personal experiences. And just in general, being
yeah,
the people leader, my number one objective is to always make my team feel empowered. I want to build their confidence.
yeah,
And you can't do that successfully if people don't feel safe in the workplace
yeah,
first.
yeah,
So it kind of came together perfectly. And the thing I loved about the mental health ERG is there isn't necessarily an in group and an out group, which
right,
again has its own benefits, is what put me down the ERG path.
yeah,
But it was also, here's a common concept or experience that we're choosing to be interested in and to take
mhm,
part in. And
yeah.
it just kind of came together from there. But
Mm.
it's really, that's kind of where it started from.
Yeah, that's amazing. And mental health as an ERG or as a staff network, mental health, as you say, almost there's no in or out group. It just cuts across everything, right? It
Mhm.
cuts across into every, identity. So that's in a way, there's almost quite a unifying, side of that as a network, which is really cool. I loved something you said, which was around almost like discovering new sides of yourself, or almost like, I guess, sort of feeling the freedom to express different sides of
Yes.
yourself once you found that community and connected in the workplace, which is really interesting. Which I guess this is part of the reason, this is part of, one of the benefits of having ERGs, right?
Yeah, exactly.
People are able to be themselves because they now identify with others in the organization who are like them.
Yes, that's exactly what it's like.
Yeah,
And it just brings that connection across the teams, where anytime you feel more connected to the people
yeah,
you're with in life at work, it just creates better synergy, better
yeah,
communication, and it just makes you feel more connected to
yeah,
the company as a whole,
yeah,
especially a company that's investing its time and people resources and
mhm,
oftentimes financial resources to really make these groups impactful.
yeah,
We've absolutely seen that across the board, and
yeah,
it really made a huge impact on our culture.
mhm, brilliant. How did you, just, I guess, from a practical perspective, because a lot of the ERG leaders that we're going to have on here haven't necessarily set up an ERG from scratch. So just practically, how did you go about doing that? Just almost like, just talk us through some of the main steps that you took to actually set up the staff network.
Honestly, we tried to keep it as simple as possible.
Yeah.
We really worked closely with our people team, HR team,
Mhm.
and every ERG we kind of set, in order to establish an ERG, here's what you need. So it was essentially things like defining a mission statement, your goals, and some tactical things you're going to do to make an impact. A few of the requirements were, in order to have an ERG, you have to host a some sort of monthly interaction for your group, some sort of quarterly like kickoff that's constantly realigning on the goals, on the expectations. And then we also had a budget for each ERG that we can use either to bring in speakers, to purchase resources. They could be things just for our group, or in some cases, we've brought in like speakers and subject matter experts, like for mental health, that we presented to the entire company. And there's, really however you wanted to approach that.
Yeah.
And then in daily application, again, as simple as possible, we have private Slack channels for each group. So Slack is what we use as our internal messaging, and just having like our own private discussion boards for just day-to-day
Mhm.
interactions. And that's pretty much all it takes, is just finding a way to connect.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, it sounds like and this is probably where that comparison between the US and the UK in terms of maturity around ERGs and staff networks really stands out, because it sounds like at your organization actually there is almost like a template that you can pick up, and it's like, okay, if you want to run an ERG, here's what you need, and here are our expectations of you. You need to start off with a mission statement, goals, etc., which is really really useful, and great that you mentioned budget. So there is already budget assigned, right, for people that want to set up ERGs, which is great to hear, because I know that's often a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. It was something that it's budget that we're using to enhance the group or provide resources, like I said, and things like that. And then based on what we were using the funds for, in some cases, it also counted for employee either volunteer time or charitable aspects, because we have used our budget in the past to donate to a charity when we didn't have anything specific that we wanted to do with it. So for instance, with the cuties, I believe, sorry to our former cuties leaders if I'm quoting this completely inaccurately, at least one of the groups we talked about was the Trevor Project. And that's a group that focuses on the mental health specifically of members of the LGBTQ community. So when there was a year, we're like, we don't know what we want to do with this money, we made the donation instead. So the resources were there for however we wanted to make an impact with them.
Yeah. And let's just talk about, so I want to talk first of all about the importance of sponsorship and leadership. Sponsorship in particular, so sponsorship from like senior leaders and leadership buy-in. What did that look like for you? So did you have like an executive sponsor assigned to the ERG, and how involved were they? Just talk us through that, and then the importance of that sponsorship.
We've had less of direct specific leaders sponsoring specific groups, mainly because while our culture is designed that our leaders are part of the group with us and we all expect that and welcomed that, it still, excuse me, was intended to be a safe space where they didn't want to feel like people would inhibit their interactions or limit the way they were interacting or what they were sharing, because leaders were also present, because at the end of the day, we're still at work. So you hopefully get more comfortable over time and realize it is truly a safe, protected space. But leadership as a whole supports the ERG impacts, that anytime we're doing an event or we have new team members joining, it's something that's discussed often and promoted. So everyone is aware that it's okay to take time away from your day-to-day to attend your hour monthly, whatever it is, or to interact in your Slack network in there. So it's made very clear that this is part of your day. This isn't on your own time, and it's an important part of our culture. So we've kind of taken it more from a broad perspective. And then we as ERG leads meet with the executive team on, I want to say, a quarterly basis, and kind of give them a briefing of, remember, here's what our ERG goals are. Here's what we've done this past quarter. Here's what we have coming up. And here's specific support that we would like from you to be more impactful in what we're doing.
Yeah, I love that. I absolutely love that. I have so I've just finished delivering some training to a cohort of ERG leaders, mainly in the UK, but one in the US. And so I've been talking about the importance of this engagement with the leadership, and the leadership knowing what you're doing, because exactly what you've described there in terms of that quarterly interaction. What are we about? What have we delivered? Where do you need your support? And I guess getting input from them as well, right, as leaders, in terms of this sounds great, and how about have you thought about that? It's just it's really necessary. It links on to one of my questions, and something that comes up a lot for ERG leaders is the time to do this on top of your day job. And what's really interesting, you said there's something about, obviously the meetings are during work time, and it's kind of understood that people will have time to sort of like dedicate to this. But it's something that a lot of organizations are wrestling with, things like, should we pay our ERG leaders, some sort of like compensation on top of their salary? How much time do we allow them, etc.? How did you find, especially leading the ERG, how did you find juggling it alongside a day job?
It honestly, once we got established and kind of got into our rhythm,
Yeah.
It's pretty seamless. Frankly, on most days, it's just another Slack channel that I'm posting in, and my co-lead and I will meet once a month for maybe 30
Yeah.
minutes to do a quick, like, is there anything that came up? Anything you've heard that I haven't
Mhm.
heard? What do we want to do on our next
Yeah.
monthly interaction? And it honestly doesn't take much
Yeah.
added time. In our case, with it being mental health in particular, sometimes it takes more emotional effort for
Yeah.
some of the things that we're dealing with and communicating, and important milestones, and I don't want to call them celebrations, but like moments of recognition, like when we have
Yeah.
like mental health awareness month,
Yeah.
or like suicide prevention month, and those types of things.
Yeah.
Takes more emotional effort. But in terms of compensation for us, we were given extra shares of equity in the company beyond what we get as
Mm.
typical day-to-day employees. Thought that was a
Great.
creative way around it, 'cause, we're
Nice. Yeah.
dedicated to the company mission. The goal is one day we are a publicly traded company and we'll have even
Mhm.
more vested value in it, but it's not necessarily taking money out of the company's pocket
Yeah.
on a regular basis.
Yeah.
And that was an added piece I didn't even know would be something as part of an ERG. I think you find the people who are willing to volunteer their time. If
Yeah.
you're a leader, please don't force your people to volunteer their time. If they are volunteering, that doesn't have to be the
Yeah.
expectation.
Don't
But most of us felt
volunteer
passionate
them.
about it. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Don't,
If there is a
don't
way,
volunteer your
go for
people.
it.
Let them volunteer them. Don't volunteer them.
Yes,
Um,
that's called being voluntold, if you
yeah,
will.
voluntold. Do you know what? Do you know how long I've been trying to remember that word, voluntold? Yeah, don't volunteer them.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. I mean, it sounds like, and something you said there in terms of once you've got the structure and kind of the rhythm, the cadence, and maybe the right people as well. So you talked about
Mhm,
like your co-lead, that you'll come together. And so I'm guessing that you kind of like share the workload a little bit as
mhm.
well. Is there anybody else that you've got in that structure that, almost like has a designated role? So do you have, whether or not they're probably not like full-time assigned, but whether you have, a comms lead, for example, or I don't know, a specific HR BP business partner who maybe
Mhm.
is your main lead? How does that look like? Is there almost like a small leadership team for the ERG?
Yeah, our ERG leads all meet together. So we do a lot of idea sharing and brainstorming, that even though our niche topics and groups are different, we're
Yeah.
doing the same things. We're facing similar challenges
Right.
and are trying to achieve some of the same, big picture
Yeah.
outcomes. So
Okay.
we meet on a monthly basis with
Mm.
the members of the people team that own and sponsor the ERGs. So we're able
Okay.
to raise questions with them
Yeah.
as a group, and
Oh,
also can do meetings where it's just the leads of the mental health ERG meet
yeah.
directly with the people team.
Right.
So we can be a little bit more targeted
Yeah.
in that, but we have that network for each other.
Yeah.
Obviously, also, we have a Slack channel. If you join the Workgram team, there's hundreds of them. So set your expectations to not be overwhelmed by that. But we're
Yeah.
all about whatever quick communication we can do.
Yeah. Amazing. So I love that. So, something about the leadership team in terms of leadership within your ERG, in terms of like your own like mini leadership team, and then I guess leveraging that support network of all of the ERG
Mhm.
leaders across the patch to kind of get ideas and bounce things off, and then into your people team or your comms team or whoever it be, those other elements of support is really interesting. Yeah, it's great to understand how it works and how it's configured in other organizations. I think there are so many lessons that we can get. Let's talk a little bit about so you're no longer running the mental health ERG, which I was saying. So before we went live, I was saying, um, given that it's almost a little bit like a startup, when you start something, you have an idea. So how difficult was it for you to step back, take that step back, and what did you feel had to be in place almost before you did that?
Yes, it's interesting actually, because in the
Mm.
time from when we initially chatted until
Yeah.
now is when I stepped down
Yeah.
from leading it. We started it, it was almost exactly 2 years from when we first proposed the idea
Mm.
until I asked to step down
Okay.
and to see who would step up in my place, so to speak. Like I
Yeah.
said, I have the benefit of having an incredible co lead, this guy named Matt. He's fantastic. He volunteered when my original co lead had moved on from the organization.
Yeah.
As a side note, I loved having a guy step up and want to join. One of our biggest goals is to destigmatize mental health in general, and especially for men. We know there's an added stigma there.
Yeah.
So having someone else who was part of it, who's just as invested, and who has the general flow of at least how it was established initially, and having a core group of members and participants that are comfortable, part of it, they know both of us. Again, especially for a space like ours, there has to be that innate trust and connection with the leaders and with each other. So knowing that I had a fantastic partner, we talked about it ahead of time, and he kind of identified it. He knew. He's like, if you're ready to step down soon, like, it's basically like not giving me permission necessarily, but more of like, I get it and it's okay. I was like, I don't want to leave you on this island to do this. But anyone who knows me knows that I take significant pride over anything that I get to create or participate in. So it was definitely difficult to step back and kind of let go of the reins. But knowing that we had a pretty settled structure, that it would be successful. And Matt has brought such incredible value to the table over the past year when he's been leading, that I had full confidence and ability to step back and say, I know this is in great hands, and I'm still an active member. So I'm not too far disconnected, but it was definitely a difficult decision, but the right one at the time, so I can shift my focus a little bit.
Yeah, and there are so many, I feel like there are so many lessons in that. First of all, the whole thing about succession, and it almost being like a natural thing, or identifying the potential successes nice and early. I love the point that you made about the real advantage of having a guy lead, to be honest, leading any ERG, right? Because often, and the research says this, I think
we take the emotional burden.
Yeah, the McKinsey Women in the Workplace talked about the fact that one of the things that sometimes actually holds women back in terms of being overloaded is that women tend to take on the burden of like EDI stuff, right? So women are the ones that tend to volunteer. So to have a guy, doing the EDI ERG lead, but specifically, as you say, for mental health, because of all of the issues around not wanting vulnerability and all of those sorts of things. That's absolutely fantastic and great that it almost feels like it was quite a natural sort of process.
It really was. Yeah.
And the length of time as well, I thought was quite interesting. You said it was like almost 2 years starting it to stepping down. I mean, I've got a thing about I think 2 years is often a good time period, because you've kind of gone through 2 cycles of doing something, making it better, getting it kind of solid, and then you almost wonder whether somebody else can't then take it to that next level, So there is something about, what would you say maybe to an ERG leader that maybe is thinking of stepping back, but maybe can't see that natural successor? Do you know what I mean? What would you say to them? Like, just hang on in there, or actively go and recruit somebody that they think might work? What do you think the options are if they're maybe starting to feel a little bit tired and burned out?
I would start by putting it out to the group. You never know, someone who may feel just as passionate about it, but doesn't want to feel like they're stepping on toes, of reaching out and saying, hey, Cheryl, whenever you're done, I'm ready. You don't necessarily want to take that approach, although I kind of have in other cases. We talked about that at a separate time. But putting it out to the group of, we're coming at about the time where we'd like to give somebody else the reins to take our original vision and drive it and add their own flair to it, and see if anyone's interested in stepping up would probably be a great first step there. And then, kind of take it from that direction. If no one steps up and wants to do it, that's a different conversation to then figure out how you want to approach that to keep the group strong and thriving. But at least start with putting it out to the group and seeing who might want to try it.
That's a great suggestion. Absolutely. Because I know, and I mentioned the burnout thing. I know that a lot of ERG leads do struggle with, juggling everything. And as you said before, sometimes it's not even necessarily the workload, it's the emotional toil that it can take on you as well, because you almost become like the emotional support for a lot of the people in the group, right? So that takes a lot of effort. Just talking about membership of the group, something that we talked about when we first had a call was about whether you should or shouldn't have allies at certain meetings. And do you want to just explain some of the differences that you've got in the groups at your organization? Which ones are more private or confidential? And then how you manage that sometimes with privacy through Slack, for example?
Mhm. Yeah, that's a great question. So I think mental health is the only group that we are consistently both public and private. We
Okay.
have our private locked channel where you have to be a
Mm.
member. That's where the most vulnerable, open conversations and interactions happen. But then we also have an open channel for anyone in the company that wants to join on a little bit of a lighter level, where
Mm.
we're sharing resources and keeping it pretty informative, positive, high level, nothing too deep or personal.
Yeah.
The other groups were almost exclusively private, especially for the LGBT cuties.
Mm-hmm.
No one even knows who's in that group unless you're in the group.
Mm.
It's only for people who identify as a member of the community and
Mm-hmm.
of any part of LGBTQIA, all
Yeah.
of the pieces of it.
Yeah.
And even if you're the queue of questioning, if you're not quite sure, but you want to feel comfortable
Yeah.
in a group, then they're welcome to join us as well. So if
Yeah.
they reach out to here's the ERG leads,
Yeah.
and if you're interested in joining, and then they put them in the private channel, all of our invites are private, our member group is private. So you don't have to out yourself to the company necessarily,
Yeah.
just to the in group. And we have, I would say, 50% of our group, if
Mm.
not closer to 60% of our group, is an anonymous member that the rest of the company has no idea that they're in the group.
Mm.
Some of us, I have a wife. I'm obviously not hiding that on
Yeah.
any level. One of our original leaders, Joe, who was one of the other male leaders of our
Yeah.
ERGs, he has a husband. So again, he's not hiding that. But
Yeah.
there are definitely people who are in there that don't want to necessarily have that public for
Yeah.
the entire company. So
Yeah.
it's completely exclusively
Yeah.
private. I don't even know if I answered your initial question because I took
No,
that
you,
some direction.
yeah, no, you absolutely did, because this was one of the things that really stood out for me, because it's not something that I've come across. Although I have had people ask me when they're setting up ERGs and stuff networks, I have had them ask me, how do other organizations do it? Should it just be for, should all of the events just be for individuals of that shared identity, and or do they open it out to allies? And if I give an example, actually, I'm a member of a group. It's not an ERG. It's more like an external ERG. It's like a race and ethnicity advisory group,
Mhm.
or it's for King's College London, and it's when researchers need to get some input from
Mhm.
different ethnicities to kind of help to shape the research. And in that group there are allies, so there are individuals that are like, I am like majority, like the majority in the UK, I'm white, but
Mhm.
actually I've potentially got some experience, and or I like this as a learning opportunity, so they come along. So sometimes people ask me, but what I loved when you explained about the LGBTQTs and why it's anonymous, I thought that was actually so powerful, because we do know the stats tell us that even in 2023, still a lot of people, particularly of a certain generation, so probably
Mhm.
less the younger generation, but of a certain generation, there are still people that aren't fully out in the workplace, and or sometimes have the challenge of almost like having to come out multiple times, if that makes sense,
Yes,
and the mental toll that takes. So every time you're asked, what does your husband do, or what does your
exactly.
girlfriend do, or they're constantly having to say. So yeah, and that sometimes pushes people back into the closet. So the LGBTQTs, I love that you had that element of anonymity, and I guess it'd be something that I would suggest to organizations, that they really think about a group like that, in terms of whether it benefits from having some level of anonymity, even if it's just in the Slack channel, even if it's yeah, I just thought that was absolutely brilliant. Perfect. Okay, before we wrap up, what have been some of the challenges and any of the struggles that you've had, either in the mental health ERG or any of the other ones that you were a member of?
With the mental health ERG, initially it was more of just establishing that this is truly a safe space where you can be completely open. We've
Mhm.
had threads in Slack, and then some of our, like we call them, our brave space sessions, where we do our direct kind of Zoom calls where anyone from the group can join,
Right,
of absolutely any topic you can imagine,
right,
deep dark ones, the more of here's what I'm trying to do to improve my mental health, what's worked for you, and anything in between.
Yeah.
And it takes a little time to truly establish that trust is in place. Obviously, it can be done, and the group really leans into it now and takes advantage of it. And then over time, it became a little bit closer, more of an engagement challenge, whereas we've, at least here in the States, our tech companies have been hit pretty hard from the economy. So there's been layoffs across the industry. So the team has shrunk significantly in size over the past just over a year now. And not only we have less people, so therefore we have less people to participate. But then there's more of kind of that underlying anxiety of people have been laid off. The company is really focused on being efficient and getting back on that growth path. Can I really take my time away from my day-to-day to attend these meetings, to attend these events? So we've tried to work. That's been probably the biggest request of every ERG lead of the executives over the past few months is, please keep pushing that this is part of our culture. This is what we want everyone to participate in. But honestly, beyond that, everyone's really open. The ERG leads are so great at putting so much effort into what they do. We've found unique ways of getting leads. Like, for instance, with our WOW, our Women of Work Grant group, this year, we have one primary lead that's carrying the entire year. And every quarter, she has a co-lead. So it's not as much time for that person, but everyone's getting a chance to kind of step in. So really just looking for creative solutions to give everyone the time, space, and mental permission to partake in it.
Yeah. And some of those challenges that you mentioned, I feel, certainly here in the UK with some of the, the economic challenges that we're having there, layoffs and things like that is quite common. So I think you raise a really useful point there in terms of, thinking through what that means and how the group is affected, and especially for your group that is focusing on the mental health. And it's something probably that will come up in all of the groups, but in a group that's focusing on that, almost how you can be that true employee resource group, right, or business resource group, because when the organization is going through such significant change, there is a real benefit to having these safe spaces where people can go and talk and share and things like that. So it's figuring out how to use it and keep it going through the challenges. So to wrap up then, my final question, and I'm going to be asking all of the ERG leads that come on here. Thank you so much, because you're my first ERG leader that's been on this little like mini series. So thank you for coming on. What tips would you give to fellow ERG leaders?
Be prepared to really put yourself into it, especially in the beginning. That it's a lot of, I'm sure this goes without saying, of leading by example. That, for instance, when one of the things we do in the mental health is we'll start threads just on timely topics. Like if we know there's something that was just difficult in the news or a big shift in anything here in the States in particular, that we'll start a thread on that and kind of create the space like, hey, we know this is a thing. If you're looking for a space to talk about it, jump in. And then we'll often start the conversation where it's a lot of that leading by example. Whatever you're asking your group to do, be prepared to do it first, or at least participate in it, especially as you're getting ramped up. But it really is worth the time when you see the impact on the group and just building those extra connections. And like I said, I'm a people person. The more connections and like true, genuine connection you can find, the better off I feel just in general. But really just be prepared to put yourself into it, especially in the beginning. Give it the time that it deserves, and then really drive your vision from there.
Yeah. I love that. I love that tip. No, definitely a thing about leading by example, but also because you mentioned again your Slack channels and how you would, potentially use those threads to create space for those important conversations. And it's come up quite a lot. And it's one of the things I was talking about on this course last week was thinking about what those ongoing communication channels are like, because there's only so often that you can physically get people on a Zoom call or in a room or whatever. But actually, as you say, if you've got a Slack channel where you can, that's more, as I call it, it's your informal communication. It's your ongoing. It's not a set piece. It's just keeping the support there in the background all the time, which is possibly more important actually than those set pieces, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, perfect. Okay. Jen, I think that's all we've got time for. And I'm conscious that you've got a full day ahead of you in Florida, in
All
the
good.
Sunshine State. Right. So thank you, Jen, so much for joining us. And where can people find you and find out more about WorkRamp if they want to know more about what it is that you do?
Yeah, I am on LinkedIn, so I'm sure we'll be tagged here. I know I was tagged in the
Yeah.
original post,
Yeah.
so feel free to connect with me. Feel free to ask any questions. Obviously, this is something I'm really passionate about. I'd be happy to really give any insights or advice that I can. WorkRamp, pretty simple. WorkRamp.com. You can learn more about the platform, how you can leverage us really across the board for absolutely any internal, external training need that you have. But we're here. Feel free to reach out.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jen. And thank you for ERG leaders all around the UK that are going to be listening into this and kind of picking up all the tips. Thank you so much for the gems.
Yeah,
Thanks,
this
Jen.
has
Have
been
a great
great. Thank you.
day. Perfect. And we're out.